Hello, Angie. Just want to make sure you can hear me. Well, it looks like we don't have audio. Hello, is everybody's audio working okay? I set the meeting up a little early so we could troubleshoot problems. Message. All right. Yeah, if you're having trouble with the computer audio, you can tell it to call you on your phone, and that tends to work for the best. And then you can speak as well. Angie, are you able to talk? I just see a little chat bubble for you. I see a number of people who look like they're signing in on the computer are having trouble turning their microphones on. If it continues to be an issue, maybe try calling in the phone line number that we sent out with the email. It's the only quick solution I can think of that might help. Oh, Angie, now I hear you. It
Okay,
sounds like
good.
you're able to talk. Yep.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I see we have a number of folks who are in just calling in. So if you are someone who's presenting, you'll have to unmute yourself. If you're calling in, if you're on the computer sign in, I can see your name and I'll be able to unmute you as needed. But Angie, can you explain what was causing you not to be able to talk, just so other folks, because it seems like other folks might be having the same problem.
Yes, and I'll type it in the chat too. What I did was I actually had the conference call me. When I called in, I didn't get the attendee ID option either, so I just had it call me. I'll put that in the chat too.
All right. Yeah, I'll make a message as well. Well, thank you everyone for being patient while we start to work with this new system. There's always a bit of a learning curve when adapting to these online conferences. Just a quick announcement for call-in users. When you call in, I don't have an ID for you. So if you need to speak, please let me know now, because I have you unmuted. Typically, people are muted on entry. Otherwise, if I can see your name, I'll be able to unmute you more easily. So is anybody who's calling in going to be a presenter today?
Hi, this is Shannon. I will be a presenter.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to rename you so I can recognize it.
This is Brent Christensen. Yeah, this is Brent Christensen with the Minnesota Telecom Alliance. I'm not a presenter, but I was hoping to make comments in the public comment part.
Oh, of course.
This is Ian Borath. I'm in the same boat.
Yeah, and for public comment, once that opens up, I'll unmute people again. But we'll try to do it sort of slowly, just because it can get, if a lot of people are unmuted at once, it can get a little chaotic. So I just ask that when I do that for the public comment period, that you mute yourself unless you're going to ask a question.
Sounds good.
Holy cow. I have no idea what they're going to get out of that. That's good.
Just a reminder, folks, as you call in, let me know if you're going to be a person who's presenting. So if you're using your phone, so that I can mark you as a person who will present, so I can unmute you. During the public comment period, I'll open up again to make sure that we get everybody. But just want to make sure that the folks who are presenting off the bat, I have renamed so I recognize them and don't accidentally mute them on entry.
Hi, this is Mark Johnson. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay,
Hello?
sorry. I didn't know if you could hear me. I apologize.
Yep.
I will be speaking during to give one of the subgroup reports. Is that okay?
Yep, that's fine. And if you're signed in on computer, I can see you. It's mostly just for the folks who are just coming in through their phone.
I hear you. I'm sorry. Gotcha.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yes.
This is Teddy. Are you able to hear me?
Teddy? Yes. Can you talk a little bit more so I can find you on the list?
Yeah. It's under my full name, so I won't say Teddy on there. So
Thank
you should be able to find me. Yep. Got it. Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep. Yes. And yes, and then if you're on your computer, you can unmute yourself. It's really just, again, the folks on the phone, you won't be able to unmute yourself if you're calling in. So.
Okay, we'll give it another minute and then we'll do a roll call and we'll get started here. Okay. Diane or Angie, are you on the call yet?
Diane is.
Hi, Ted.
Oh,
Yep,
okay.
Angie
Look
here.
who we
Good
are.
morning, everyone.
Good morning. Diane, I don't know if you have a quick list of everybody on the task force. I was trying to look for a list somewhere, but probably should have.
It would have been on the 2 emails, but I do have a list. Do you want me to do a roll?
Yeah, that'd be great if you just do a roll call and see who we have.
Okay, well, Teddy, you're on. Nolan Calvin sent an email saying he was going to be needed out in the field doing installs, so he was not going to join. Dale Cook had a conflict. They're busy standing up their telehealth, their telemental health work. Is Steve Fensky on the call? Steve Georgie? Shannon, I heard. Mark, I heard. Bernadine? Brian Crambier, I think I saw him. I haven't heard him, I don't think.
Yes, I'm here.
Micah Myers from St. Cloud.
I'm here.
Teresa Sunday.
I'm here.
Jim Wycombe.
Good morning.
Paul Wirtz, I think I heard you.
Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
And Dave Wolf.
Good morning, everyone.
All right, that's the list.
Okay, sounds good. So it sounds like we have Nolan, Dale, both Steve Fensky, and Steve Georgie not on, and Bernadine. So and we'll see as we get going. All right, so let's go ahead and get started.
Betty, can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you. Who is this?
Oh, okay. Steve Fensky. This is Steve Fensky.
Yeah, okay. Hey, Steve, how are you today?
Hey. Morning.
And Teddy, did you get my name, Dave Wolf?
Yep, we got, I think she got you in.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, so right now it's Nolan, which I don't think is going to be joining us. Dale won't be, and then Steve, Georgie, and Bernadine are the only ones not present yet. And they might join. So I think I tried to share my screen. Are you able to see the screen in front of you?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So that's the agenda. I think this is probably going to be the screen that's going to be up the most. Well, welcome everyone. I'm glad you're able to make it to this meeting, and I'm glad you're able to hold this meeting. We had a discussion last week about potentially canceling this meeting or postponing it, but one of the things we didn't know is how long the stay-at-home type of policy was going to stay in place. So, and considering that one of the things we're trying to do is get the rollout of broadband out, it made sense that as a broadband task force, we make at least the effort to meet together. I can tell you that, on Wednesday I was on a call from 8 to 5 straight with 1 hour break, and that was awful. So we're trying not to make sure that everybody has to go through that, and instead of having our traditional 4-hour meeting, shorten it up to 2 hours, and I think even depending on how the conversation goes, we might even go a little bit shorter than that, and try to give you some time back in the day. Just quickly going through the agenda. We're kind of doing the introductions and welcomes now. We'll actually maybe open up for maybe some 1 or 2 comments here before we kind of get going. From that, I want to just kind of have a general discussion on the subgroup. I've had some good questions from the chairs over the last couple of weeks as far as, what's the deliverable for the subgroup? How should we be thinking about preparing for those deliverables and things of that nature? So we'll kind of go over that. I might even use one of the examples from the subgroups, just this from what I've seen. From that, the majority of this meeting really is going to be just more on the updates from the subgroups. And so we'll get the Minnesota model going first, barriers and technology second, and then the economic development and digital inclusion as a third update. From that, we'll open it up for some business. I know we have some 15 minutes up here, but I think the subgroup updates probably be a lot shorter than what we have there. And I do have one topic that I want to introduce first to the group here, and then we'll open it up to anybody on the task force, and then from there we'll opening up to everybody else from the public side that's on this call. So with that, are there any other 1 or 2 comments anybody needs to make before we sort of dive into our agenda for the day?
Mr. Chairman, this is Brent Christensen with Minnesota Telecom Alliance. I would like to give the task force a little bit of an update of what the industry is doing in response to the pandemic and keeping the network up and going. I don't know if that's appropriate now or if you want to do that at the end.
Let's do the subgroup. So let's do the subgroup updates, Brent, and then I'll turn it. Will be the first thing. I'll turn it over to you, and you can give us an update on that. Will that work?
That's fine. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other public comments at this point?
This is Nathan Zacharias, and I think I'll do the same as Brent. I'll defer till after you guys have taken care of the good chunk of your work, and I'll make the Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition's comment a bit later.
Okay. Thanks, Nathan.
This is Anna Bora. I can do the same.
Okay. Thanks, Anna. I'm writing them all down, so I'll remember. Okay. Any other public comments? Okay. Hearing none, so let's kind of jump into our agenda for the day. So I think the subgroups were formed. You guys have already had a couple of meetings already. I know some of you have already had some Zoom calls and things of that nature, so I'm excited to hear about how those are going. In general, I did get some questions both from Mark and from Bernadine as far as, what's the expectation for the subgroups. Obviously, one of the things I was thinking about, and again, this is open for discussion, is first, I mean, as a subgroup, what are the topics you want to tackle, and thinking maybe about the deliverable at the end is the way to think about how to break up those topics, right, within the subgroup itself. And at least my thought process is ultimately what we want to do at the end of the year is have a report that goes out to the governor and to the legislature with a set of recommendations. And, as we have those recommendations, there will also be some analysis behind it about how we got to those recommendations. And I'm thinking that the topics that will be discussed in the subgroups will lead to a set of recommendations for the subgroup. And those recommendations then will be part of the overall recommendation for the overall report at the end. So just making it up at this point in time, but let's say there's three recommendations per subgroup, would have a total of 9 recommendations. And then when we look at those recommendations, there's topics behind them and there's some analysis, and that's what would be in the report. So as you get into the subgroups, that's why I was a little bit stressing out on what is the deliverable at the end, what are the topics we want to tackle there. From that, you can start formulating maybe some assumptions on some recommendations, and then work backwards on what's the analysis that needs to go into it to be able to get to that. And so you may have some outside speakers for that to be able to come talk to the subgroup. You may want some additional insights from the Office of Broadband or from other parts of the Minnesota government. We can bring those in. And then at any point in time, if you feel like some of the topics that you're discussing or hearing about is worthy for the larger task force group to hear, I think it would be good if you reach out to myself and Diane, and we can make sure that during our scheduled meetings that we bring those speakers in or have a discussion on that topic. So that's kind of how I'm envisioning it throughout the process as we do these updates like we're doing today. At this point, it's just more of an update on sort of what's the group doing, what are they thinking about, et cetera. But as the recommendations start to get a little bit more crystallized as we go later into the year, we will actually talk about those recommendations during this meeting as well. So, so we make sure that everybody's abreast. So that was my overall thought process for that, but I didn't want to be too prescriptive, which is why I didn't sort of dump it at the very beginning. But as questions came back, it made sense that that kind of gave a little bit of an explanation on that. I'm hoping this is sort of what you had in mind, but I'm open for discussion here if others thinking that we should be thinking about it differently or structure it, the framework slightly in a different way. I'm totally open to that. So wanted to open up to see if there's any questions or kind of discussions or comments about that before we jump into the subgroup updates.
This is Shannon. I do have a comment thought. I worry about too much of our work getting pushed down into the subgroups, especially, when you had mentioned, Teddy, having speakers addressing the subgroups, just because I guess maybe I'm just nosier than the average human, and I certainly, to the extent there's a subject matter expert talking to a subgroup, I would really like, as a broadband task force member, to hear what they have to say. And so, to me, there is a lot of work that happens in the subgroup, but I think that work is really formulating what sort of agenda work needs to happen at the larger task force level, so that by the time we're all evaluating recommendations, we all feel pretty comfortable with the foundation, so that we all have equal ownership in the topics. And since we're public that way, the public, to the extent they want to participate and listen, also have an equal opportunity to really see what the task force is looking at and how they're basing their recommendations and what evidence we considered.
Yeah, that's a good point, Shannon, and that's a good clarification as well. So, yeah, I didn't mean it to say that all the presentations would happen at the subgroup level. Like, I think I almost see the subgroup as the vetting body for the larger task force, right? So, almost to say, like, okay, this is a good topic. Everybody needs to hear this, and let's make sure we get it scheduled and everybody gets a chance to hear it. So, absolutely. And then the second clarification that you had in there, as far as the recommendations themselves, I think we're going to do a lot of these subgroup meeting updates, subgroup updates at the task force level. And as you can see, I mean, we're going to dedicate ample time to it. Today, because it's one of the first ones, it might be, maybe too much time because there'd probably not be 25 minutes worth of discussion. But in the future, I think as we get into the subgroups, that's exactly the idea. It's not just a report out. It's more of let's have the conversation as a group as we're as the subgroup brings up sort of the topics to talk about, right? So it's almost as if there's you give us something to discuss from the subgroup, and then as a whole we have that discussion, and we all have a voice in it, and so then we feel really good, to your point, about the recommendation that we might make at the end.
Okay, that sounds good. I think, having the subgroups drive the agenda and make sure that, that to the extent there are speakers that the subgroup would like to hear from to do their work and for the broader task force to do their work, I think that makes a lot of sense to basically have the subgroups doing some of that legwork so that our meeting time as a group is the most efficient it can be.
Yeah, and I appreciate your comments. Those are great clarifications. Other thoughts from the group?
Eddie, this is Steve Georgie. I just think with all the uncertainty about COVID-19 that, doing this work basically in isolation is truly going to be a challenge, not only for the subcommittees, but for the task force as a whole. So
I agree. And I agree not just for the subcommittee. I feel like I agree for my whole life right now. Any suggestions? On that one. Are you thinking maybe we try to get back face to face as soon as we can, or space out the meetings, or?
I think we wait and see.
Yeah.
I think we'll have.
Yeah, we'll wait.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think we're going to have to wait and see. And I'm in the world of education where we're in a distance learning mode through at least the beginning of May and probably the rest of the school year. And I think that's going to make it tough. But I am an advocate. I think in the future, now, right now we're not doing video meeting. And I live in that world where if we did it through video and had an opportunity to sometimes seeing each other makes it feel a little easier to do. I'm just throwing that out there, and maybe everybody doesn't agree with that because you're wearing your PJs right now, and that's okay. But sometimes I think that helps the interaction and helps make it feel like you're more face-to-face, and you can see people, and you kind of get more participatory that way. That's just my thought as we move forward.
I completely agree with that. It's much easier to feel like we're getting more connection if we can see each other. And for the record, I am out of my pajamas, so I made an effort today.
I'm dressed.
Okay, good suggestion. So I'll work with Diane and see if and the team at Deed to see. I know these WebExes. I've done them with video, so we should be able to turn the video feature on. But we'll just have to see how we do it with the volume of people we may have on the call. Not the task force folks, but even the public.
Teddy, this is Mikey. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
The irony to this, and this is some of the issues, and I just experience it here because depending on, there's latency and other items where video conferencing work to keep the thing going, but sometimes the face-to-face works if we can, on the wait and see. But part of what we're trying to do here, there are people, we have a high influx of people that typically aren't using internet services at the time slots that we're in now, because you have people doing distance learning where kids, you would see uptake in bandwidth utilization. The times you could model it when kids are out of school. Now not only do you have kids out of school, you got parents that are working from home, so you're challenging the areas that we're trying to come up with a way to serve them. you're really gonna see where we have deficiencies and bandwidth or bandwidth constraints for folks that have. Luckily for me, I'm in the office. If I'm doing this from home, they're with my kid, both my school age kids being in the home, we'll be maxing our bandwidth at that point. So we'll be able to identify with a real world experience as to the challenges that we're facing going forward and what becomes our new norm. We don't know if we're going to be getting back into the what we consider our previous norm. This may become our new norm, so it'll be somewhat challenging.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Teddy, this is Bernadine. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Bernadine. Welcome.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. So I just had a question or a suggestion maybe for today. And like everybody else, I've been on a lot of Zoom calls mostly, but the chat box is often helpful to make the meeting more interactive and give people a chance to. And I'm wondering, I noticed that on this WebEx, we do have a chat box here today. And I just wanted to suggest that as an option for people to engage in the content as well.
Yep, absolutely. And I think you can see my screen for those of you who are on. I just brought up the chat box, and there's an opportunity to either chat with one person one-on-one, or you can chat send the chat to everyone. So that's good. And Dana Bailey, for example, just let us know it was on from CenturyLink. Welcome.
Yep.
Okay. Other questions or comments? All right. So with that, what we'll do is we'll turn it over to the subgroup. Shannon, maybe I'll turn it over to you to kind of walk us through what the subgroup 1 has been doing, and then, but other members of the team, feel free to jump in and chime in. And then the rest of the task force, I mean, this is just not an update, but also an opportunity for us to ask questions and engage in the conversation. So with that, Shannon, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, super. Thank you. And I think we have our subgroup charter to put up.
I think it's coming.
Yeah, no worries. So the Minnesota Model Subgroup is myself, Steve Fensky, Brian Cranbeer, Teresa Sunday, and Paul Worth. And we met and put together, we used the templates that Teddy sent around, and we'll definitely talk about it, but I thought maybe before we got into the actual document, it made sense to talk about what exactly is the Minnesota model, so that we're all kind of working on the same page. To us, the essence of the Minnesota model is partnership. The Office of Broadband Development, broadband providers, including traditional telcos, cable companies, electric co-ops, government and nonprofit entities willing to make an investment in broadband. In Minnesota, we really stand together in competition, or in cooperation, not competition, to serve our state. That said, there are things that we can do differently, all of us, all the different pieces of the Minnesota model. And so we thought that it made sense for this subgroup, we, meaning the entire task force for this subgroup, to look at taking a closer look at the Minnesota model, not resting on our laurels, to see what we're doing well and what we might be able to do a little bit better. The 2018 Broadband Task Force Annual Report really laid out the specifics of what the last task force viewed as the Minnesota model, and I thought it might make sense to just go through that. So I'm going to read the quote from page 7 of the annual report. Minnesota's leadership is characterized by a statutory framework, key components of which include 1, realistic, forward-looking internet speed goals. 2, an Office of Broadband Development within the Department of Economic Development charged with numerous broadband oversight responsibilities, including supporting the Governor's Task Force on Broadband. 3, broadband deployment mapping capabilities to accurately plan, monitor, and track broadband infrastructure. And 4, the border-to-border broadband development grant program to provide matching funds for broadband infrastructure deployment in unserved and underserved areas. So that's really all we did in the 2018 report was really, as far as, discussing the Minnesota model as a whole, was to define it, and then the report broke out the different components of it. Okay, let's see. Do we have our charter? I mean, I have a copy of it myself, but
it was up though. It's coming back now.
Okay, cool. I'm going to say sharing it might stretch my own tech capabilities. And I can certainly just talk through it too. It's fine. So we thought, we really talked about what pieces of the Minnesota model we thought, or some looking into questions that we had personally and we thought maybe the broader task force might have. Related specifically to the grant program, we thought that the challenge process really just getting a little bit better. So, okay, I'll get this up. So we're looking at, oh, wait a minute, I skipped down to the middle. My bad, sorry. I'm just going to continue in that thought though. That the challenge process in particular has had a lot of questions and has people expressed some concern about it. And so we thought that it made sense to look at it and from an educational perspective, make sure we actually understand what it's intended to do, whether or not it's capturing that goal, and if there are any tweaks that might be prudent. Not expecting that there might be, or that honestly it's really the role of the task force to look at it, but we do get questions about it, so we thought it was worth a look. The issue of mapping on both the state and federal level is really critical, and so we thought looking at what resources are available, but also actually taking some time to go through the maps so that we understand what the distinctions between the state and federal mapping programs are and how they reflect on Minnesota's progress. And then also just to take a look at the Office of Broadband Development so that we as a task force have a better understanding of all of the obligations that they face, because there are a lot of them. And a lot of those obligations are articulated in statute. And so having a full understanding of what the office is supposed to do, what it's accomplishing, and use maybe the Delta as an advocacy point for more support for the office's roles in particular. Because there's, in my view, and this is my personal view, there's more assigned to the office than is probably reasonable. They do an incredible amount and accomplish an incredible amount. But I think it's good for us as a task force to have a better understanding of all of it. Okay, so if you look at our charter, I don't know, looks like maybe it went away. In our charter, in the upper left-hand corner, it was our deliverables. So we as a group saw our role pretty much as Teddy just outlined it, was to contribute items to the larger task force agenda, including identifying speakers that we think would be useful and outlining the general information we think the task force needs to have in order to really decide on recommendations and adequately vote on them at the end of the program year, and also to draft our section of the annual report, what information is critical. So the goals we'd like to achieve, we kind of just went through these: explore the grant program, update the task force on the mapping process, and evaluate the OBD workload and resources available. So we kind of went through that. Our benefit, I think the Minnesota model works because it's a dynamic model, and that we are constantly looking to improve it, tweak it. Where necessary, I think change for the sake of change is usually counterproductive. But if there are things that we can specifically recommend that the legislature look at, or the governor recommend to the legislature, then I think that's the role of our subgroup and the broader task force. We we considered out of bounds for our subgroup the speed goals and specific budget recommendations. And as we look at how our subgroups break down, I think we need to be mindful of what our subgroups aren't doing so that nothing falls through the cracks. And I think, to the extent we want to evaluate the statutory speed goals and make a budget recommendation, the latter of which, the budget recommendation, I think we absolutely want to do. That probably isn't a specific role of any one subgroup, but of the task force in general. So we just kind of have to keep an eye on that. Our anticipated challenges, scheduling, and we had our meeting before, the global plague set in. And so, of course, we've all gotten a little bit better about meetings and being flexible and doing online meetings. But just getting the right people in front of the task force is always going to be a challenge. So we had identified that as something for us to be mindful of. And then we actually set out what we thought specific agenda items might be for the commission or for the task force to consider. So, for example, the first one was a discussion of the challenge process. We thought that OBD staff could maybe talk to us about what that process, let's define the process, and then talk about how it's been implemented, and talk to industry about what their concerns are, if they have any, or how it's working. If this challenge process is accomplishing the goals that we all thought it would, and then invite the critics, if there are people outside of the actual grant participants who feel like their voice isn't being heard. This is an opportunity for them to speak and to engage in the dialogue. I think it's good for us to have a two-way discussion about it. Maybe I will pause and see if there's any conversation, if anybody wants to weigh in on the challenge process, specific speakers, or if you think the challenge process is something that the task force should or shouldn't be looking at.
This is Teresa. I just have one comment. Oh, I'm sorry. It is regarding the challenge process. I've heard a comment, and it came from somebody here at MediaCom, about they were told that they couldn't go into a certain area because the incumbent there, or the other provider in that area, said that they were going to upgrade. And I think there's like a 2-year frame where they would upgrade, and then they had to prove they upgrade, but they didn't upgrade. And it's all vague to me. I could get more information on it, and we could talk in our subgroup next time. But I think that's part of the challenge process that needs to be looked at, is the Office of Broadband Development going back to the ones that said, hey, we are going to do these upgrades, and find out if they actually did them or not.
So like an audit of the carrier commitments that are made as part of the challenge process. I think that's definitely something that we can talk about in our subgroup, and yeah.
Right. Shannon, you did a good job of capturing what the discussions were, so thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Shannon, this is Teddy. I mean, one thing I'll say is I really like the fact, I think the framework looks good. 2 comments. I mean, the speed goals and the budget recommendations being out of scope for the subgroup, but in scope for the task force. I think that's something we'll have to keep in mind, and you'll have to keep us honest, right, so that we don't get too far in the year and we forget about those pieces. Not that those are easy to forget, but we've got to make sure that, obviously that part of our overall report needs to include both those things probably. And then the second one is around I do love the idea that box that says potential agenda items. And I know that, for example, we had this grant program challenge process. I love having that. And I mean, just a comment for the other subgroups as well, because when we look at agenda items for the future meetings, I think this is a place we can draw upon versus us coming up with it, is if the subgroups now are vetting, hey, this is a good topic to discuss, and here are some potential speakers for it. which maybe have been discussed, at these updates, then what we can go back and for the following meeting, we could probably set up something where we can have a robust conversation on these topics. So love the idea of be able to use this kind of framework to be able to set up the agenda items for the future.
Hey, Teddy, this is Bernadine. I'd like to offer some feedback or comment to Shannon and their team, their Minnesota Model Subgroup. And it's about how we talk about and describe the Minnesota model. And Shannon, thanks for reading to us from page 7 of the 2018 report and those 4 elements. I'd just like to suggest that maybe one, when you introduced the model, Shannon, you said that one of the things that Minnesota is known for, that's outstanding, is our collaboration and cooperation. And, and those 4 elements doesn't really fully capture that. I noticed also when the Pew Charities, when they described, they picked Minnesota as one of the half a dozen states that they highlighted having best practices at the state level. Collaboration was the element that they really called out as unique and effective about our model. So I'm just thinking that we might want to consider when we talk about the model and how we see it to ourselves and others, we might want to include a 5th element that has to do with collaboration and partnerships, that we call that out as a key component of it. And there's people on the call here today. We have the Broadband Coalition. There's all the work that's done across communities. So just a thought, a suggestion you might consider as we talk about the model, that we call out that collaboration partnership as an element of our success here. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernadine. I think that's essential. And in my introduction, I talked about partnership because it is such a key part of what makes our program work, and and it's so funny because it is, to me, Minnesota. I mean, even broader than our broadband grant program, and it's what we do. But I think including that as an explicit element of the Minnesota model is a really good idea, and I will definitely take that back to the subgroup and think about how we do that. Okay, so our next potential agenda item was a mapping update. So for the state update, we thought the office is probably best suited to give a state update on how we're doing it. And I would just, as a pause, Minnesota does so much more by way of mapping on a state level than most of the states in which I work. And so we're very lucky to have a state resource to tap to talk about it and to help us understand kind of where we're at and how we continue to evaluate. I mean, they're two sides of the same coin. How do we do the evaluation, and then what is the actual outcome? How are we doing? And so I think both of those are critical. The feds are getting much more involved in mapping, and carriers who receive federal funds are obligated to do a lot more data entry into what the FCC calls the hub, geolocating actually served locations. And so getting an update on the federal level from NTCA or maybe WTA, we thought would be a good perspective for, how is it actually working? What are they doing? And again, how does Minnesota fare? And is there any distinction between our state perspective and the federal perspective? Because I think that's something for us to keep an eye on and make sure that if there is a delta there, what is the cause, and is there a role for the task force to advocate to correct it, or even just acknowledge it? So I'll pause for a second on mapping if anybody has any comments or thoughts about mapping.
Shannon, this is Steve Fensky. You guys able to hear me right now?
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, good. One of the pieces to that Teresa had raised when we talked about it was the timing too. So not just how is the mapping done, but also when it's updated and kind of how that interplays with the process to apply for grants. And I guess I'd like to hear more about that timing element too. So not just where we get it and how it's used, but when are they updated and how does that affect the process here?
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because ultimately, you're right. I mean, the maps play a critical role in how the grant funding is distributed. So, yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for raising that. Anything else on mapping? Okay, OBD challenges. We had talked to Diane, and she agreed that she in the office would be willing to discuss the statutory tasks and resources available to accomplish those tasks, and give us their perspective on their daily work. I know that these are particularly extraordinary times for all of us, but for the office also, because they're in somewhat a transition staff-wise. So that won't necessarily be a key part of the discussion, but it's certainly something for the task force to recognize. Okay, any OBD thoughts about what we might want to add to that item, or things that the task force might want to hear about? Okay. And then our last item was a discussion of broadband in the COVID-19. Now, again, we met, COVID-19 was on the radar, but it wasn't this. And so I'm looking at what we wrote, 2 to 3 weeks ago, and it feels almost parochial now, given the incredible efforts that are happening in industry to expand coverage in response to the crisis. And I know we're going to hear a little bit more about that after the subgroups report out. So I won't pontificate other than to say I am no less than amazed at the volume of work that is happening in triple time to meet the incredible demand for connectivity, to make things like distance learning happen, and to connect people at home so they can actually work and our state economy can try to trudge through all of this. But I think doing a solid look at this will be even more critical than I think the subgroup thought it would be, because the demand is and the situation is so much more extreme than I think we anticipated it would be even a couple weeks ago. So I definitely am interested in thoughts on that.
Shannon, this is Brian. I think it's really brought, I think, our initiative and the importance of this committee to a new level. I think broadband coverage across the state of Minnesota is now critical, truly critical infrastructure going forward. So I think you did a nice job of laying that out. But I think we've got a significant opportunity here to be the platform to truly use this as an infrastructure that's critical for not only future operation, just for business in general. So thank you. Nice job.
I'm only the voice of the subgroup. The group did the work. Any other thoughts about broadband in the pandemic era?
Yeah, to your point, I think Shannon will have we're going to have a larger discussion about that here at the end of the updates from the subgroup. So I'll keep my comments to then.
Okay, yeah, and I think that is entirely appropriate. So that's what we have for the Minnesota Model subgroup. I think we have a really good group, and we're looking forward to digging in and bringing a lot of good information forward, and hopefully good speakers forward to the task force to consider these items and whether or not a specific recommendation might be warranted for any or all of them.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Shannon, and thanks for the team for the work and getting together, having the discussion, and then putting it together in this sort of framework so we can give us an update and also an opportunity to have a discussion on it. And like I said, it does give us a good launching point to how we have the meetings and then how we have the speakers come in or topics to discuss, and then formulate our recommendations from there. So with that, we can turn over to the second subgroup, so barriers in technology. Mark, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Teddy. Thank you to the Minnesota Model Group. You put a lot of effort and work into your charter, and that's going to help us a lot. As I took a screenshot of it, I will say we didn't share ours out yet because ours at this point still looks like a whiteboard with lots of things written on it and lines and things asterisks next to things and things like that. And I will tell you part of the reason for that, obviously, it's affecting all of us is the pandemic. And our meeting ended up being pretty much right at the point where everybody's lives were being tipped upside down. And on our committee, I'm co-chair with Dave Wolf, who of course is a provider. Nolan, of course, is working with a provider with CenturyLink, and Steve and Jim and I, all three are involved in schools and libraries. In our worlds, of course, have been tipped, as I said, completely upside down. But I will add to that before I start talking about a couple of things, is that the pandemic, as Shannon said, is certainly gives us a ton of things we can study. And in our area, in rural broadband across the state, there's an enormous opportunity for us to look at what worked, what didn't, really where are the pockets of access or lack of access. As I say, it's a target-rich environment for study. It's just going to be a matter of us taking the time to do that. In education, in our region, we did, all of our districts, and I think across the state that was pretty common, immediately sent out surveys to all their schools and said, do you have internet access or don't you? And they asked the question in a number of ways, which makes the data hard to, aggregate. But everybody did that. I mean, just in my region, we have probably 10 to 12% of families that reported they don't have any kind of access at all. And I think that's a little underreported because we're probably not reaching some who don't have it. And we had another probably 10% where we have a lot of question about whether they're going to be successful with distance learning. So I will just tell the group that might be helpful to this group. We are going to lead an effort, my cooperative, at perhaps moving it to a statewide level of doing a little survey on the effectiveness of distance learning in comparison to their broadband access after they've been doing distance learning for a week or two. And we're going to try to formulate a set of questions that asks that in the same way to everybody so that we get good data back on that. So I just throw that out there as something on the side that might come into play in our, and because the barriers in technology group, obviously that's kind of within our tent as part of our circus is, what are the barriers? And that's something that we're going to take a look at. So I just throw that out to the group. And you can comment back on that later. And then I'm going to say, Dave and Steve and Jim, when you want to add something, just please speak up. First of all, I'll just say the goals sort of that we started with, and then they're going to get modified based on the discussion we're having today. But we looked at it and said we need to review and modify as necessary the state broadband speed goals. So where speed goals were not necessarily in the scope of the Minnesota Model Group, I think they're well within our scope. And so we want to work with the Minnesota Model Group and the task force as a whole on that speed goal issue. We feel another goal would be to report on current and future technologies for delivery of high-speed broadband. If we're talking about speed goals, we're talking about the grant program, we're talking about all those things, we need to know what technologies are in play. And so that's one of the goals that we'll take a look at. We want to identify, obviously, barriers to deployment. That's part of our subgroup's charter name. And then also report on lessons learned from the pandemic. So we're going to take that. I think all of our groups are going to look at that from with different lenses. And that's certainly one that we're going to look at because we think we're going to learn a lot of lessons from that. So I did jot down a couple of things, in terms of in scope for us, obviously speed goals, barriers, lessons learned about, through the pandemic. And I think hearing the Minnesota Model Group talk about, I think we're going to be in real synergy with that group and complement each other. And we're going to try to make sure that we communicate about that with each other and with the task force as a whole. In the area of speed goals, we talked about one thing, saying the current goal, 25.3 goal, probably going to be outdated before installation is completed. So we look at the 2026 goal and say that certainly provides a level of service that allows much more adequate or much better connectivity from any location. And that's one of the expected benefits to everybody, is that if we can move that needle and keep moving forward on that, that's going to be better service for everybody in the state. We're going to look at the lessons learned from COVID-19, the pandemic, of course. Some challenges that we're looking at learning more about are things like geography. We heard some folks talking to us about fixed wireless and about improved cellular programs, 5G, and so on. And we know that geography plays a role there. We know that geography plays a role in fiber. In terms of whether you can bury fiber or not. Northern Minnesota, it's tough to go through rock, things like that. So obviously money is always a barrier. I think we're going to learn some lessons, and we're going to say where are some good ways to direct our funds through this current crisis situation that we're in. Is there going to be legislative resistance to increasing speed goals? We don't know. That's another thing that we've talked about. Let's see, what else do I want to say? Things that we talked about bringing to the large group it makes sense to me when it was talked about earlier about with the subgroups and having guest speakers come and talk, that there might be things that everybody wants to hear. So we were thinking that if we wanted to look at a few additional technologies, just so that as a task force, we come from the same. We've heard the same thing across all the task force, and we've already heard from 5G about 5G. We've already heard about fixed wireless. There's probably some other technologies that maybe we think we know everything about, but maybe we don't. That we might want to bring to the table, and so we're going to investigate that and look into that for everybody. And that's kind of where we are, I think. And I'm going to say, Dave, Steve, Jim, does any of you have anything you want to add to that before I ask a couple of questions and let the group give us some feedback?
Is my microphone on right now?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. And I really appreciate the coordinating you're doing, Mark. Dave will phone in.
I heard you.
Wanted to throw a couple. Or go ahead.
No, there you go. I heard you for a moment, and then you went out. But go ahead. Keep going.
What we're seeing as a provider too, and I just want to throw a couple things out, and I apologize if this is more for comment, but we're seeing RVs and ice castles being used as mobile classrooms for the distance learning prep. And when you look at from a service provider standpoint,
there are lots of innovative ways that in education that they're starting to try to deliver that. Buses are delivering materials to kids. Districts are putting wireless access points outward facing so that people can drive up. Libraries, I know, are doing that too, so that a family can drive up and get access. So there's all kinds of innovative ways that education is going to happen over the next month or more.
And it is always just hooking up broadband to a home. It's broadband to a shop or
yeah.
fish out.
You,
and what
you are
we've
correct.
seen as a provider is a 20% increase in overall bandwidth consumption. About 7% of that's actually getting out on the internet. But of that 27% increase in Netflix consumption, 38% in YouTube, 28% in Prime Video, and 50% increase in Disney Plus viewing. So that's statistics. And I'll be quiet now. Thank you, Mark.
Not surprised by that. I'm not. I don't suppose anybody is. That's interesting statistics, though. Thanks for sharing those, Dave. Steve, Jim, anything to add?
I just want to echo Dave. This is Jim. I want to echo Dave's comments. Or thank you for assembling this. This is you really synthesized what was discussed. Thank you.
Good. I tried in between some of the other things going on right now. But again, I appreciate Teddy and bringing the subgroups together like this, and I appreciate the work Shannon and your Minnesota Model Group has done, and I know that I'm going to hear the same thing from the Economic Development Group. That helps us a lot. So we're going to be able to reformulate now our charter, and I think have a much better direction. Because I'll be honest, I'll speak for myself personally, kind of struggling with exactly what we were expected to do. This has been very, very helpful. And then I'll throw the question out to the whole group. Is there anything you want to add to our plate that you think we should look at that you didn't hear me say?
Mark, I think the team is focused on the right things. As you put the charter together, I think it'll help us kind of maybe give you some additional feedback. But I totally agree. I mean, I think looking at the technologies, what are their limitations? To your point, we already heard a little bit about some of the technologies at the last meeting. But I look forward for the team to recommend to us as a whole what else we should be listening to. And then some of the barriers. But something you said that was interesting as well is during these times, people are putting in place some really novel solutions to be able to provide connectivity to those who need it. And it might be interesting to capture that as well, of not everything, but just some of the things that, in distressed times, we actually came up with a solution, and that could be more of a permanent solution rather than some of the temporary ones. So that'd be interesting as well.
Thank you. I'm adding that to my whiteboard right now, and then we will share that charter out with you and the whole group as I get it just a little bit more refined. So appreciate that comment, because you're right. There's, I think, a lot of stories that we will be able to tell, and I think telling a few of those stories will be a really good, impactful piece for the final report.
Yeah, awesome.
So that's all.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for the barriers and technology subgroup? Okay. Hearing none, we'll switch over to the third subgroup. So the economic development and digital inclusion. Bernadine, I heard you're on, so I'll turn it over to you. And I believe you do have a document that we can look at.
Morning, Teddy. Hi, everybody again. Yes, so thank you. Our Economic Development and Digital Inclusion Subcommittee is myself and Dale Cook and Micah. Dale's not able to be with us this morning because, like some others on the task force, he's out on the front lines working on COVID-19 response. But with his help, our little subcommittee has set up Zoom meetings that we're on our calendar now to the end of the year, and that's been really helpful to get that going. And we have met a couple of times, and thanks so much, Teddy, to you for getting the charter out for us, as all of us, as sort of an organizing document to help us figure out how we can contribute to the whole. So what you've got in front of you, and I'm actually looking from my desktop, so I'm not sure. Do you guys have up the document there in front of you as well?
Yep.
Yes, we do.
Yep. So it doesn't look like it's a Word document, not in the formatting, but it's kind of the same content. So as our subcommittee name implies, the problem that we're trying to tackle is the concern that not everybody has access to broadband that meets our state speed goals or the skills to really fully take advantage of it. And also that our policymakers at local and state levels, we think, lack the adequate appreciation for the role that broadband plays. And our hope is that we think a better understanding of its role, especially in the COVID-19, of course, this is a new reality for us, that it will help create the conditions for more public investment in our grant program. So we've kind of came up with these 5 goals here for our subcommittee. And as I talked about a little bit at our last meeting, we thought a good place to start, because this issue about economic development and digital inclusion has been one that the Governor's Task Force has been grappling with iteratively. And over the last bunch of reports, there have been recommendations that from the Minnesota's task force on these topics. And so what we're going to do is review those, and we've already identified from past reports what those are, and take a look at what has and has not been accomplished in terms of those recommendations, what might still be on the table for us to address as a state, and then based on those, come forward, as Teddy talked about at the beginning, with recommendations relevant to our scope of work for the review for inclusion in the report. And then our third goal is to identify stories of broadband impact. And I think this is an area where we've all talked about that this morning, that we'll want to coordinate across our subcommittees so that we're not duplicating and we're really helping one another in a way that adds up rather than duplicating. So, but we, this idea about both the benefits and the pain, the benefits of having and the pain of not, those are stories that we see our role helping the task force identify those for our report. And then number 4, as others have talked about, helping to identify and recruit people that could present to the panel, to the task force on these topics. And in particular, we had talked about a good way to do that would be to get representatives from communities that have received early round state broadband grants, that have had a little time in the field to demonstrate some impact potentially, and that a representative group of community beneficiaries would be a good panel to pull together for the task force that we could then also draw on for our report about what is the impact of these state investments. And we like the idea of focusing those stories on those communities that have received state investments, because we see a real benefit from our work in helping to, again, underscore the sort of the ROI for the taxpayers in Minnesota on these public investments. And then finally, our subcommittee recognizes that the speed goal is outside of our, that's not on our plate, but we did want to recommend that as we consider as a task force whether we want to revisit our speed goals for the state, that we hear from the Pew Trust about their study of broadband policies and practices. And so I guess today that this is a speaker that or input that we've already identified that we think would be beneficial for the whole task force to hear from, as we're thinking about how we do it in Minnesota to get a sense of compared to what and what are the other states doing. Below are some more deliverables, but before I go into that, I'm going to just pause here for a moment and welcome any feedback from the whole group about this set of goals for our committee.
Bernadine, this is Shannon. I really like the idea of pulling in some of the early winners, and I think there's some benefit to the subgroups working together too to identify those folks and having them discuss the economic development benefits, but also since we'll have them talk about the process itself, what in hindsight they wish they would have known before they applied, what they maybe have what their experience taught them in later rounds if they applied for later rounds. I really like that idea of having some of the folks like really on the front lines doing the work, getting broadband deployed, having them come in and give us their perspective so we can include that narrative in our report. So I appreciate you bringing that forward.
Great, thanks, Shannon. Yeah, so in terms of our specific deliverables, of course, the draft recommendations in our purview based on really a look at what has been recommended in the past and where we are on those. So draft recommendations, clearly a deliverable. And then we've talked about identifying, recruiting, and preparing this panel of leaders from communities that could address the task force to talk about benefits and to broadband and digital inclusion, and then collecting those stories as I mentioned. So those are the deliverables that we had contemplated for our group. So I'm happy to really like to hear from the group in the spirit of Mark. So what are we missing, and what else should we be thinking about, or other input to our subcommittee?
You know, Bernadine, one area I think I was just thinking, I think Steve Georgie, when we were at the last meeting, you mentioned something about the community in your area had just received some funding and implemented some broadband, capabilities there. I think that would be one area to, but those are the types of stories you're looking for. I think we can find many, but I know we have potentially somebody on the task force that was speaking to that last time, so that may be good to make that connection too.
Yeah, that was a Reconnect, Teddy. That was a Reconnect grant to Terry Township, but yeah. And it's federal funding, and of course, our thought was that we want to talk about the impact of state funding as a higher priority for the task force.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was just mentioning as far as the results, right? Like, so this happened, so this is why we need to do more of it. And I don't know if it helps with the state cause or not, but no, multiple stories. The more we have, the better.
Sure.
Bernadine, does it make sense for your subcommittee to reach out to some of the businesses or corporations that are struggling because of the lack of quality broadband? Prime example being the Delta Airline Reservation Center in Chisholm, having a tremendous difficulty in retaining and recruiting workers when they try to expand capacity because of lack of space and inability of people to work from their homes because of the lack of rural quality broadband.
Absolutely. Thank you, Stephen. That Delta story is a good one to be mindful of. Thank you. You bet.
So, yeah, and just point of information, they just purchased space in the old abandoned Mountain Iron Buell School during this COVID. They want to spread workers out, and because they're hooked up to the Northeast Service Co-op fiber, they have the right kind of bandwidth there to enable them to deploy workers to that site.
Okay, any other questions for Bernadine and the team? All right, hearing none. Well, Bernadine and Micah, great job on this, and same to Dale. I think we have a great start on this one as well, and look forward to the recommendations you want to bring to our team. And I think even though larger task force would be super excited to hear about the successes of when we do have great connectivity and how we can leverage that, as well as the areas that are struggling and where we're not able to get things done because we don't have the connectivity in those spots. So thank you. All right. So let me share my screen maybe one more time. I'll just bring the agenda back up. Here we go. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Okay, so before we turn it over to kind of the open discussion, and then we have several folks that want to make some comments here, I did want to bring up one topic. So as you all know, we submitted the letter to the governor asking the $30 million in additional appropriation for broadband. That initially got a lot of good feedback about people, saying they'll keep that in mind and pretty excited about it. But then as the COVID-19 news got worse and worse and things became a little bit more realistic here at the state level, I got a call back from the governor's office and said, at least for the moment, all funding was going to be really focused on COVID-19 and things we had to resolve in that area. And for the moment, the broadband piece was going to go a little bit on hold and see kind of how this situation was really going to unravel itself. And then depending on where we stood, we could come back and rethink that or think about how we want to take a look at that. And this again was like maybe 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, when even before we announced a lot of the things around COVID-19. So there's a lot of unknowns at the moment. And here in the last couple of weeks, and I was planning on kind of updating the group here at this meeting, but here in the past week or so, we've been starting to hear a lot of issues with, especially if the virus makes itself into rural communities, this is going to be a true issue. And the fact that, you need to have the ability to do telehealth and be able to get in touch with a nurse or a doctor becomes super imperative. Obviously, from an educational standpoint, Mark and the team, I mentioned it earlier, that becomes critical. I've been thinking that, this actually, having the ability to do broadband is actually a critical need or a critical infrastructure, as we mentioned earlier, and that maybe this is not the time to shy away from this. So I was actually meeting with our team at Land O'Lakes and some of the folks in government relations. And as we look at, and we also reached out to a few folks like Mayo and others to see kind of how they were thinking about it and how they're handling it. And obviously this question of having good broadband or having some sort of a broadband to be able to access folks so they don't come into hospitals before they have to. They can get a diagnosis beforehand, and also maybe even if they do have to come in, letting them know which hospital is best to go to. These things would become critical as if the virus does spread in rural communities. So that we've been thinking about that a little bit, and then we said, well, maybe there's another shot we could take and go back to the governor's office and maybe recommend that we actually say that, look, we understand that we put it on hold for a little while here till we understood the impact of COVID-19 onto the community. But we do feel like this is the time where we actually need to push further and make sure that we have these the broadband capabilities out to the broader Minnesota. So we've been thinking about actually drafting up some sort of a recommendation to be able to be sent to the governor and the legislature. We're still in the very early draft stages of it, and I have Matt Woolman here on the call that can maybe talk through a little bit of how we're thinking about it. At this meeting, I'm not looking for anybody to make any approvals or anything like that, but I just want to kind of give you a heads up, and then what I'll do is circulate it through to the team over the next week or so, and then say if we all do agree, and we can call another quick meeting if we need to get together. If we all agree that it's something that we should submit, then we'll go ahead and do that. If not, we can hold off on it. But at least want to get that thought process get going. But before I open it up for discussion on the task force, Matt, if you're on, maybe you can give us a little bit of a preview of what we've been talking about.
Absolutely. Thanks, Teddy, and thanks to the members of the Governor's Broadband Task Force for the opportunity to join you all today. We've been thinking about requesting an emergency supplemental budget request in addition to the $30 million supplemental budget request that's currently before the legislature. And we kind of have developed kind of a two-pronged approach here. and I'll walk through that a little bit. But if you go back to, the 2018 report, on page 12, I believe it is, there's a calculation of what the need is on a biennial basis. And what we did is we started there and looked at the 150,000 households that we currently are unserved at this point in Minnesota, times that, 5,500, roughly that $5,500 mark to serve those households. And that gets us to somewhere around $825 million in terms of the scope of the problem. And then, you look at that, the 50% cost share, that gets us down to about $412 million, and you take out the current $85 million that we have in the CAF2 program, and you take out an additional $58.9 million in the ACAM program, and then the $40 million in the last appropriation, and that gets us to somewhere around 230 some million dollars, 238 million. And if we were to say that, we're going to try to get this back on a 3-year strategy to meet, 2022, a yearly appropriation, we'd be looking at somewhere around $76 million. And so our thought is to expand the current $30 million supplemental request to $76 million. And then additionally, some of the items that we've kind of identified as potential things that could be included in the rider language is, continue that scoring prioritization for unserved and underserved areas. But for projects that are in unserved areas of the state and cover, a good amount of people, allowing the Office of Broadband Development to offer an enhanced state matcher up to 75% for those projects. And then additionally, there's a current statutory requirement that limits the border-to-border broadband grant program awards to $5 million. And our thought is if we're focused on these unserved areas, that we could remove the statutory limit to provide those grants. Additionally, we've kicked around some other ideas. What could we do to kind of be bold here and recognize the moment that we have here and the need that obviously is going to exist into the future, and how do we position Minnesota going forward? And our thought is, I served at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture before coming to Land O'Lakes, and the Department of Ag has a program. It's the Minnesota Rural Finance Authority, and that Rural Finance Authority is able to offer user-financed revolving loan funds to farmers and agribusinesses across the state. And to date, Minnesota has offered about $242 million to farmers through a wide variety of loan programs offered through the Rural Finance Authority. And how this Rural Finance Authority was set up was the state is currently, every biennial budget there, or every so often, they appropriate money through the bonding bill into this revolving loan fund. It works through traditional lenders, so it's not something that the state is becoming a bank, but work through traditional lenders to offer these programs that essentially lowers the interest rate significantly for borrowers. So our thought is to also develop a similar kind of financing model to address rural connectivity in Minnesota. and ask the legislature to stand up, allow DEED or the Office of Broadband Development to stand up and administer a program like this and provide some emergency funding through the capital investment bonding bill to finance that. So those are a couple thoughts that we have in terms of our funding requests. Additionally, we would like to explore the Department of Employment and Economic Development giving the commissioner some authority to work with other applicable state agencies, federal agencies, and local level officials to deploy a fast-track permitting process that would, within the current extent of the law, so not going around any current statutory provisions, but allow for a fast-track permitting process for those applications that serve particularly unserved areas of the state, but also underserved areas of the state as well. So with that, Teddy, I'll turn it back over to you, but that's a quick overview of what some of our thoughts are.
Yeah, no, thanks, Matt. So for the task force members, again, this is something that we're contemplating. Matt's got a good sort of template that he's put together of what this recommendation would look like, and I was thinking about pushing it to the group for kind of feedback and comments, and kind of thought see where your thoughts were, and then if we all aligned, then we could submit it if we could get that route. So, but before we go, down that path, any comments or thoughts from folks on the phone? Does this seem like something we should be doing, or you're completely against it, or have more questions?
Teddy, this is Paul Wirtz. I guess my first reaction is these are major policy changes that we're or that this letter would purport to change in the broadband task force, and the money as well. I think even if we were to call for accelerated funding, it'd probably be 9 months before we'd have shovel to ground on most of these projects anyhow. I'm very uncomfortable with what I've heard on some of those points that are being outlined. These are major rewrites of the broadband grant program. There's absolutely no chance for oversight. There would be no chance for legislators to have any oversight of these policy implications. I'm not even sure. We've got $40 million. The governor told us that $30 million. Everything is being devoted to COVID-19 relief. I think it's a little tone deaf for us to come back and ask for $76 million at this point, knowing that most of this stuff wouldn't even have an impact until next year. I think we're on solid ground for, leading towards a much more robust request for the 2021 budget. But I think that we're not. There's even no recognition here of the private investment that's going on right now. So that's just kind of my perspective as a task force member.
Yeah, this is Shannon. I echo Paul's concerns. I mean, I guess I think some of the ideas that were brought up are really interesting and definitely worth talking about and debating. But I guess my perspective is this would be a complete rewrite and expansion of the Minnesota model. And what we have now is, working pretty effectively. And so I would urge some caution. And I think before we put anything forward, we really need to dive down into the actual data and make sure what we're putting forth is accurate. I mean, just a couple of the things that I heard that give me some pause is, just some of the straight up math, the adding up all of the money coming into the state and taking it off the top doesn't really work when you consider how much of that money is not intended to be directed to CapEx. It's as much OpEx. And so, it gets complicated, and I wouldn't want to rush to propose a solution that might have some pretty big holes in it. I think some of the issues with what the actual cost per drop is something we really need to look at. And, I know hearing from providers, getting enough contractors to bury fiber and to get the installs done and get the actual infrastructure work that's been committed to already done is pretty thin. I mean, we're having trouble, getting enough people to do the work now. And so a brand new program throwing a lot of money at a problem that might not, we might be lacking some big picture items to be able to accomplish it. It gives me pause and a lot of concern. I mean, I think it's definitely something to think about, to look at, to really dig into. I would have some real heartburn fast tracking it without having done that preliminary work and being pretty comfortable with it, though.
Teddy, this is Steve Fensky. If we could get it in writing, and I don't see it on the screen, the share screen here, unless I'm missing something, but some of them sound interesting, but I guess I'd like to see them a little more closely and have a little more time to think about them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I was just introducing the idea. The thing is still in very much draft state, so after, I don't even know if we'll get to it today to be able to share anything, but by certainly in the early next week, I can share it. And again, all the comments are good. This is exactly the discussion I wanted to have and make sure kind of got feedback from the folks. But yes, not asking anybody to make any decisions at this moment in time. We will share the documents or at least the template that Matt's put together, and we can certainly go from there. So the goal was just to kind of introduce the idea and get the feel for what the group was thinking. I just didn't want to drop it to you in an email, and then you go, well, what is this? We never even talked about it. So,
Teddy, Bernadine with just some comments. So I think that there is a case to be made, and really mindful of what others have said before me, that investment in infrastructure can be seen as part of a COVID-19 response. We heard from Mark about, we all know about distance learning in particular. And I have a concern that a lot of resources are going into just Band-Aid responses that won't advance our technology infrastructure goals over the long term. And so maybe a modest and more simple approach might be to consider that the governor revisit his original support of an additional $30 into the grant, or $30 million into the grant program. That is a program that is ready to go. We have a proven method. We know we have a pipeline of projects that are going to address un- and underserved communities. And simply kind of reframing how we think as a state about our COVID-19 response, that we're going to do some immediate stuff, but we're also going to accelerate investments into a longer-term solution. So my feedback would be that we think about a letter to the governor and the legislature that would urge them to consider that additional $30 million into the existing grant program as part of our COVID-19 response. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Bernadine. Other comments from other task force members?
This is Brian. I think I would agree with Bernadine that that's a logical approach that we've taken. We've talked about, and I agree with the other comments. I think it's a pretty big step to. We need to look at this a little closer before we would move on the bigger picture. It's a great discussion. There might be some other things that we can look at just on some of the barriers we have to put fiber in the ground and expand resources. Some of the environmental, some of the other regulations that we have to go through, contractors, and those type of things. So I think there is a role for us to play in the immediate package, but I think we need to look a little longer term on this also.
And this is Mark Johnson. I agreed, and I added something to the chat that while Bernadine was talking, ended up being what Bernadine was saying. So I certainly agree with that. I think we have to do something, and I think the funding piece is the easiest path when we have a model that's fairly successful right now, and then take some time to think about all of those other policy issues, which are great issues, but something that probably takes us a little longer to chew on.
Agreed. This is Teresa, and I agree with Bernadine and just the $30 million. It's too big an ask, especially at this time. I mean, it sounds really good, but it's just not the time to be asking for those types of funds and changes. It's just now is not the time.
Okay. Others, I think, do anybody else have any other comments? Okay, hearing none, here's what we'll do. I will get the template. I hear you on the 30 million. We'll put that, maybe make that modification. We'll circulate what I have, and again, feel free to make comments back. And again, I'm not saying we're submitting this by any means. Just kind of want to get people's thoughts. And also the other piece wanted to understand is kind of what are some of the barriers. I think somebody said that. And Matt has more of a simplified version of maybe what some of the barriers might be now. And those are things that we talk to. Maybe we can even consult with the Office of Broadband Development to see if those are things that are kind of stopping us today, and see if there's some changes that could be made just in the short term. But again, that's if we all agree. If not, then we're not going to push that forward. Okay, so we'll be sending that out. So expect that, and then if we get to a spot where we need to call sort of a quick meeting for 30 minutes or so, we might do that, and we'll probably do a doodle poll and things of that nature. If not, we'll just kind of continue with our just regular schedule. Okay, so time is just kind of to open up other businesses. I heard 3 individuals that wanted to make some comments. Brent, you were first. Maybe I'll let you go now.
Thank you, Teddy. I just wanted to give the task force a little bit of an update of what the MTA members have been doing since this pandemic has started, and some of the things that we're seeing in the network. Probably the biggest question we're getting from folks is how is the broadband network going to adapt to people working and going to school from home? And the number one answer that I'm giving everybody is that it really doesn't change our world. That traffic is pretty much the same. Our peak times during the day are from businesses and schools, and that is shifting. Our peak time at night is residences, and we're seeing it's pretty much 9 o'clock everywhere now as far as our network goes. I think Dave Wolf said this a little bit earlier. I'm just going to kind of expand on it. There's a huge increase in Netflix traffic and Disney Plus and all those. Most of our members have gotten those off the internet a long time ago through cash servers or direct connects to the 511 building just for that traffic. So that traffic is off the network. If it wasn't, it would have a big impact on internet speeds and usage, but we're not seeing that through a variety of our members. In the governor's order, we have been working with the Office of Broadband Development and the Department of Commerce to make sure that our staff gets included in critical infrastructure. We're currently listed under Tier 2 now, so our folks have access to critical daycare. We also have, we're exempt from certain parts of the executive order so that we can get out and get people connected. About half of our members have signed on to the FCC's Keep America Connected pledge. The other half that haven't signed on are following the principles. They just don't want to commit to anything that when we don't know how long this is going to last for. We're seeing, as far as e-learning goes, our members are pretty much into 2 different camps with low-income programs and getting people connected. About half of them are doing some sort of low-income program that people can subscribe to. I have encouraged them to work and keep OBD connected and on those programs that they're participating in. The other half of our members are working directly with the schools and identifying students that don't have access to internet at home and then working to get them connected. They're not advertising those programs, they're just doing them. But just because it's not on a list somewhere and it doesn't show that it's being advertised doesn't mean it's not getting done. Because I think we have a weekly call of our general manager and CEOs, and that is pretty much everybody on that call is doing some sort of program to make sure that the kids in their communities are being connected, and that teleworkers are getting served as quickly as we can. We've seen a huge spike in new internet installs. It's not at all what we thought. We thought people didn't have internet at home because they couldn't afford it. We're not finding that at all. We're finding a huge number of people are calling in and ordering service that have never had it at Big Home, but they're not asking for low-income programs. They're just signing up. They have no problems with paying for it. They just didn't want to have it at home before for whatever reason. I couldn't tell you. That one surprised me. I didn't think that would be an issue. That is forcing us to prioritize installs. Most of our members are pretty much putting video services, TV services on the back burner. They're focused on internet first. Our members have an obligation. We're different than the wireless folks and the cable folks because we're regulated more heavily by the Department of Commerce. So we have obligations to get repair service to telephones first and not internet, but we're prioritizing new installs on internet and getting people connected as quickly as we can. And then our workforce, we're struggling with the same things that a lot of other industries. We've seen a huge increase in installs, both through getting teleworkers and e-learners connected, but also the new installs I was discussing. And then we're also trying to keep our social distance, and we're trying to keep our workforce safe. We have some companies that are rotating workers. They're putting half their installers working 1 week and half of them working the next week, and then alternate being off so they can keep distances. We have other companies that are dispatching their techs remotely. They're just coming into the office to pick up equipment, and they're trying to limit interaction at home. Through our MTA safety program, we are working on best practices and other things for technicians so we can keep them safe. And we don't want to be exposing anybody, and we don't want to be the carriers of the virus. So we're working on personal protective equipment for our staff, and also things like doing self installs. We have some companies that have never done self installs that are starting to do it, and talking people through it over the phone and things like that. So that's kind of what's going on in our industry segment, and I know Anna's going to talk about the cable folks here in a little while. So be happy to stand for any questions.
I don't have a question, but I would like to thank you and your company for the efforts. I know Northeast Service Co-op is opening up hotspots to any of their connections, and CTC has offered to come up and assist and actually create additional Wi-Fi hotspots wherever possible using the middle mile fiber from the service co-op. So thanks.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't mention that. That's a part of the FCC pledge, but that's something that a lot of companies are doing. I know my company, we've turned up Wi-Fi in the campgrounds, so until we get some of the students connected that aren't connected, they can go down there and park their car in a camp spot and have internet access. So there's a lot of that stuff going on. They're getting creative. And to Bernadine's earlier point, these things, and through, I don't know if Nathan's going to talk about this or not through the coalition, but I think it's very important that we distinguish the difference between short-term solutions, or short-term fixes, and long-term solutions. We're all doing everything we can to get people connected right now, but that doesn't mean, and I don't want to give the impression to anybody that that's a long-term solution for this, because a lot of this stuff is the urgency of the situation and getting people connected right now, but it's not a long-term fix.
That's a good point. Thanks, Brent. Appreciate the comments and the update and everything else that you're doing at the moment in time. So if there's no other questions or comments for Brent, I'll maybe turn it over to Nathan.
Yes, thank you. Can everybody hear me? I haven't talked yet, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Teddy. I just wanted to give just a brief statement. So first off, thanks to you and the task force members on all your continued work on what is, I think, our shared goal of broadband access border to border across the state. We're seeing the COVID-19 pandemic really prove that broadband is no different than any other basic service that people need. It's an essential part of our workforce, education, healthcare systems, businesses, and we're seeing this play out across the state as leaders and people just like Brent are talking about how we're scrambling to provide internet access for those who don't have it in their homes or businesses. Kids are being asked to learn from home. Lots of people are being asked to telecommute. And even patients are asked to use telehealth services to receive care at home, especially if they're in quarantine. But as we all know, that's impossible for thousands of Minnesotans who lack access to basic broadband service. And as said before, I think Paul brought it up, we can't fix this problem overnight. But the coalition remains committed to pursuing additional funding this year from the legislature for the border-to-border broadband grant program. And we strongly believe that any funding package passed by the legislature from here on out should include an annual appropriation of $30 million for broadband grants. And that's part of our message that we've had all session and part of the two major broadband funding bills that are moving through the legislature. Now, legislative leadership has publicly announced that they're looking for items with bipartisan agreement. And the coalition, again, believes that broadband funding should be one of them. We've worked very hard in conjunction with the task force and other groups in the state to make this a bipartisan issue. And I think we've really made a lot of progress on that. So we, the coalition, are asking the task force to join us in asking legislative leadership and the governor to make broadband funding a top priority during the final weeks of the legislative session. Whatever you choose as a group to do, we're hopeful that you're supportive of funding. And we're also looking forward to hearing more about the new policy and funding items that Matt brought up earlier. And we think that the task force is really the ideal place for that conversation to take place. So thanks for letting me talk for a bit here. And I guess I'd be happy to answer anyone's questions if they have them.
Any questions or comments for Nathan? Okay, hearing none. Anna?
Yep, I'm on. Thank you, Teddy. Like Brent, I just wanted to provide the task force with just a few broadband updates from cable's perspective, and I would echo a lot of Brent's comments in terms of the governor's executive orders, the workforce concerns, the ways we're limiting interactions with customers, and those kinds of things. But first, all Minnesota cable companies have signed the Keeping Americans Connected FCC pledge that was mentioned earlier. Like was said, they've opened up all of their Wi-Fi hotspots for public use and are making sure that no one loses service because of the virus or receive any late fees, and that's all part of the FCC pledge. But above the FCC pledge, there's a lot of resources that cable companies are stepping up to provide above and beyond the FCC pledge, and I just wanted to hit the highlights. It's not an exhaustive list by any means, but I think the bottom line is that there's been a recognition that low-income communities especially will be hit hard by all of this, and a real effort by companies to try to help with that. So please feel free to share these resources in your communities. I know how well connected all of you are, and I'm happy to follow up with any of this information. For starters, I'll start with Charter. Charter's offering free internet, including Wi-Fi, to any students, K-12 or college students, and then they also just added educators and teachers who don't have the internet, and that would be free for 60 days. Comcast increased their speeds for new and existing customers of Internet Essentials, which is available to all low-income households in Comcast service areas. And additionally, new families who connect will get 60 days of internet free. Midco just announced a new service on Friday called Midco Internet Basics, which will be free through June 15th for low-income students and families who don't have an internet connection at home and need one for remote learning. Mediacom increased the speeds of their Connect to Compete low-cost internet program, and qualifying families who subscribe will get 60 days of free service through that program. And they also extended the pricing of their Access Internet, which is their light sort of internet usage package for new customers at a lower cost. And obviously, Teresa could speak more to this if folks have questions on their programs. RVIG announced that they're offering a program for families with K-12 or college students to receive free internet service. It provides any internet speed available free of charge, including Wi-Fi, and that service will stay until the school year concludes. And then my last two members are SCI and Schoberg's. SCI is based in Hinckley. They just started a temporary low-income program for families with kids at home who need e-learning access, and I know Schoberg's has had this assistance in place for quite some time. So similar to Brent's members, all of these companies are working through the local school districts to make sure everyone has the access they need to study remotely, and also with, federal, state, local governments to meet the connectivity needs and to deliver the reliable services that I know are really in demand right now. And then just to echo some of Brent's comments in terms of the questions I've been getting on our broadband networks, which is that all indications so far is that it's performing really well. The pipe, so to speak, has been built well to handle all of this. And I know our companies are constantly evaluating how the networks are handling that demand. But right now they're feeling pretty good about current performance, but I would say they're not resting on that either. So like Brent said, the peaks right now are shifting more towards the middle of the day versus evening. But that's okay because that's what we've engineered for. So I agree with the comments earlier today, too, that there's things we're going to learn. But right now, from cable's perspective, the networks are adapting pretty well. So that's all I have, and I just appreciate any and all help getting the resources out there. We're always looking for new contacts to send this information to. So Teresa has my contact info as well if I can answer any questions.
Yep. Thanks, Anna.
Yep, great. Thank you, Anna. Any questions, comments for Anna? Okay, hearing none. Is there anybody else that's not on the task force from the public side that would like to make any comments or bring up any items to the task force at this point in time? Okay. So hearing none, we'll kind of do sort of a wrap up here. So let's see. So right now, our next task force meeting is going to be tentatively scheduled for April 29th, if I'm correct. Let me check again. Yeah, Wednesday, April 29th. As of now, it's still the face-to-face from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. What we'll need to do is probably spend some time and see how the situation unfolds over this next 2 weeks, and then we can make a call on whether we need to do another one of these virtual ones or we could actually do a face-to-face. If we were to do a face-to-face, I know we've talked about a variety of different venues to be able to have this meeting, but I'm probably, because of the disruptions we've had, we may end up at Deed for this April meeting if we do end up doing a face-to-face. If there's other possibilities, we'll certainly explore those. In the meantime, I would say still have the subgroup meetings. Again, I think most of you have some good structures. I've already had some good discussions. Again, I will leave ample time into the agenda next time for the subgroup, not only updates, but also ways to have discussions. And I would think from the subgroup you'd want to bring the topic up so that we could have a healthy discussion on those various topics at the task force level. And then we'll probably have room for one or two speakers that we have we have a list right now, but even as you provide the different sort or the project charters or the charters that you put together, we can draw from those as well. Again, that charter, you don't have to keep that format. If there's pieces you don't like and you want to put it more in a Word document like Bernadine did, that's absolutely fine. Whatever works for the team and whatever keeps it most organized, that totally would be a good way to do it too. That's all I had. Diane, Angie, any other things that I may be missing out?
No, I don't have anything. Just a reminder for any subgroup, if you want me to help set up the meeting time or to open up our conference bridge for your call, we can certainly do that.
Thank you.
Teddy, this is Angie. Nothing from me other than to express my gratitude to all of the folks in the industry and all of the members of the task force who are working tirelessly to get folks connected, and appreciate the work that everyone is doing while they're trying to take care of their own families and keep their own companies up and running. These are extraordinary times, and Minnesota is up to the task, and it really shows with what's happening here. So thanks, everyone, and be safe.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo that. Yeah, everybody be safe. Hope we get through this. It's a little bit of an adjustment in our life a little bit. I know it has been for me, and yeah, we'll stay connected virtually. I mean, that's a great part about having the technology today. It's awesome that way. And actually, I also want to echo the sentiment of the thanks to the providers that are continuing to tirelessly make sure that the connectivity is up for those of us who have it, and then even coming up with novel ways to serve those who don't have it today and need more. So with that, I will end the meeting, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks. Have a good weekend,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.